인클루시브 코리아 2021
Welcome to Session 1 of Inclusive Korea 2021. Thank you for your participation, both online and offline. I'm Kim Mi-young. I will be leading you throughout the event.
네, 1일차 위기와 혁신
We are
그리고
here
포용이라는
at day
주제로
1
진행했고요. 그럼
under the
제1
topic of
세션
inclusive
한국판
recovery
위기와
and a
미래를
leap
여는
forward.
정부
The
세션을
first session is
시작하도록
titled The Korean New Deal and the Government Opening Up the Future. Let us invite the first presenter. We have with us Director Jae-in of the Department of Knowledge Economy at KDI, who will speak under the topic of the Korean New Deal and global leading economy.
Good afternoon. My name is Jahyun from the Department of Knowledge Economy at KDI. Thank you very much for inviting me to this significant event. Before I go into the presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Randall Jones from Columbia University. Now, one or two slides, actually, however, is written in Korean, so I ask for your understanding. Dr. Randall Jones has worked at OECD and also has worked closely with KDI before. And I also understand that he reads Korean very well. But nevertheless, I ask for his understanding for having a couple of my slides written in Korean. So I will be talking about the Korean New Deal and global leading economy. Now, to overcome COVID-19 and to overcome the economic difficulties, the Korean style New Deal has been implemented. So we will take a look at the characteristics of the New Deal and also look at some of the ways for Korea to emerge as a leading economy in the world. So this is the contents of my presentation. And first, I would like to take a look at the Korean New Deal and what kind of characteristics it has amidst the world economy as we are still faced with COVID-19. Early last year, COVID-19 swiftly spread around the world, and a lot of countries started to close down their economies. As you can see on the left side graph, the global activities were greatly contracted. The global economy since the second half of last year went down, but after the resumption of global activities and with the rollout of vaccines, you can see that there has been a swift recovery. As you can see on the right, the world economy from the minus 3.3% growth this year is expected to exceed 6% growth. The US, Germany, France, UK, and Japan, these advanced countries, have overcome the contraction in their economy and is expected to show speedy recovery of their economies. COVID-19 has hit the world and scarred the global economy. The global economy experienced a dip in productivity, and that is a challenge that the world economy will have to overcome. So you can see that the real economy has greatly contracted. But compared to the global crisis, the situation is not that stark. But nevertheless, you can see that the developing nations were greatly hurt, and so the global productivity has also been hard hit. So please take a look at the left and right side graph for your reference. On the other hand, the COVID-19 crisis also helped the world better understand the urgent need to respond to the challenge of climate change. The close down of the economies showed that the global economy has been using a massive amount of carbon for production activities, and also the climate change-led phenomenon actually has hurt the world, and it showed that if the global community does not actively react, then the mid to long term, a massive impact, negative impact, would be suffered by the world. Please look at the graphs. Also, COVID-19 has widened inequality. So if you look at the right side graph, you will see that Especially in the youth and the low-skilled workers, the labor market has been greatly hit, and this has further intensified the income inequality. The IMF and other institutions around the world has shown that COVID-19 has led to a number of worsened economic challenges, such as income inequality, and has given policy recommendations to actively respond and deal with these challenges. So next, I would like to talk about the challenges facing the Korean economy in the post-COVID-19 era. So recently, if you look at the Korean economy, you can see that a rapid economic recovery is taking place, driven by exports. The IMF said that the Korean economy will experience a 3.0% growth compared to the minus 1.0 growth of last year. KDI also believes that the economic growth will be in the late 3% range to 4% range. However, the Korean economy is faced with a number of challenges. The Korean economy, as it matured further, saw a reduction in investment opportunities, and the growth potential contracted as well. Particularly after COVID-19, we could see further imbalances in the labor market, which led to rising concerns over the growth potential of the economy. COVID-19 is expected to further accelerate industry transformation. So what kind of policy response should be implemented? I think that is something that has to be considered because that will determine the future of the Korean economy. If you look at the left side, this shows that the Korean major industries are changing as we face the fourth industrial revolution. And on the right side, you can see that AR, VR, technologies, and metaverse industries are now rising as new promising industries. Also, the global economic environment is changing, as I mentioned before, and the global major economies are trying to respond to the issue of climate change. For example, they are focusing on reducing carbon emissions as a major global agenda. The Korean economy, like the global economy, has been hard hit by COVID-19, especially among the low-income households. And these low-income households are at a big risk of their income further declining. As you can see, that the lower-income brackets are facing greater drop in incomes, and also the face-to-face service sector jobs have been hard hit. Next, let's take a look at the characteristics of the Korean New Deal. The government has been dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and believes that this can actually offer a new opportunity to Korea. And it announced the Korean New Deal. After the financial crisis in 2007, there were many policies that were implemented to further develop the economy. And likewise, this time around, there were a number of plans announced to help promote the economy, which includes the New Deal. This includes the Digital New Deal, the Green New Deal, and the social safety net. Strengthening policies. The government, in order to pursue the Digital New Deal, the Green New Deal, and strengthening the safety net, will be injecting about 160 trillion won of budget. The second half economic policy direction was announced, and also details of the Korean New Deal were announced as well. Quality information is called the oil of the digital economy. And so utilizing the information, digital healthcare, intelligent government, green smart schools, and other flagship programs, actually 10 of the flagship programs have been announced and are being pursued. Also, the era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution is known to be an era of conversion and collaboration. And a single ministry cannot work alone in such an era. And so, the ministries in charge of the economy and social affairs have to work together to pursue the Korean New Deal. So, more than 11 rounds of meetings were held among the ministers to pursue the New Deal. And as the economy transforms itself from a production-based economy to a knowledge-based economy, there are more concentration in the capital area where there is more information and digitalization. So the government has to further strengthen the infrastructure in the local regions. And so regional New Deal projects are ongoing. The regional New Deals would focus on the digital New Deals, and these would be initiated by the local governments, and the public organizations within the regions will support them. And also, policies to promote innovative businesses in the local regions are being pursued as well. Based on the Korean New Deal, the Korean economy should emerge as a leading global economy. And to accomplish this, there are a number of challenges that we have to overcome. Let's take a look. Now, digital transformation is not something that we can choose to do, but it is essential for the Korean economy to further strive. So the companies that are leading in digitalization and utilization of information is leading the global economy. So Korea's digital infrastructure is world-class. However, the company's digital capacity, I think, has to be further strengthened. And also, in terms of the carbon neutral policy, well, this is a responsibility that should be fulfilled by all members of the global community. But there has to be widening understanding of the need for carbon neutrality, and we need to systematically prepare for carbon neutrality. For example, as you can see here in the table, Korea has to work further for enterprise renewable energy utilization. This is a topic that has been in discussion in the global arena, and Korea has to make more efforts to fulfill its goal. Also, new technology is required for digitalization and environment-friendly businesses and economy. And at the same time, this has to be reflected in efforts to strengthen safety nets. So upskilling and reskilling is also required, and for that, the government needs to do more through policy measures. During the UN Trade Development Meeting that took place in July, Korea was designated as an advanced country and was put in the advanced country group. This means that Korea no longer can mimic the economies of advanced nations. The Korean economy must have the government, the private sector, research institutes, and all entities work together so that further advancement is achieved. And also, the Korean New Deal can become a new opportunity for another leap forward, but for that, a structuring reform is required. And also, the economic resources have to go into the sectors that have greater added value. And so we need some restructuring in our industrial structure as well. And also, as digital literacy is quite important in this era of digitalization, individuals' digital literacy has to be upgraded so that the disadvantaged in our society can also armor themselves with digital literacy. So this is also important in terms of strengthening social inclusion. Last but not least, there has to be revitalization of the local economy. The local governments and the public institutions and agencies in the local regions and everyone in the regions have to work together to create core capabilities and create the right ecosystem. Last but not least, tests or exams are very painful for students. But actually, after going through the exams, the students find themselves even stronger and equipped with greater knowledge. Likewise, I do believe that the crisis situation was like an exam for the Korean economy to look back at some of its weaknesses that can be further strengthened. So we should take this opportunity to review ourselves, our society and economy, and find ways to further advance. Thank you very much for your attention.
네, 고맙습니다.
Yes, thank you very much. We just heard from Dr. Koo Jahyun from KDI, Director of the Department of Knowledge Economy.
Next, we will go on to Professor Sun-Jin of the Graduate School of Environmental Studies at Seoul National University, who is also the chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. She will speak under the topic of a carbon neutral 2050 and energy transformation.
예, 안녕하세요. 방금 소개받은
Good afternoon. As have been
윤순진입니다.
introduced, my name is Sun-Jin, and also have been introduced, I am going to present under the topic of a carbon neutral 2050 and energy transformation. I will talk about the global trends and the Korean situation.
크게 네 가지로 구성을
These are the four topics on my agenda today. We are currently living in a carbon neutral era, so we're shifting from the focus of climate change to carbon neutrality. And in order to respond successfully to the carbon neutrality vision, we have to think about energy transformation. And let's also take a look at the changes of the global market and politics for carbon neutrality, as well as the tasks at hand for Korea. Here you can see the history of Korea declaring carbon neutrality. In 2015, there was a very important international treaty signed in Paris called the Paris Treaty. Compared to the pre-industrialization era, the promise was to made that we will keep the global warming to 2 degrees Celsius or below. And in Article 4 of the Paris Treaty, it says that in order to make sure that there is a balance between emission and absorption, we need to achieve the peak of emissions as soon as possible. And then, for the first time in the world, Sweden actually announces carbon neutrality by 2045 in 2016. And in 2018, IPCC issues a special report. IPCC is an organization that provides various scientific knowledge and information about climate change. And they actually announced the 1.5 degrees special report. And they also conclude that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees means that we need to reduce the CO2 emissions, which also translates into the fact that we need carbon neutrality. And in order to achieve this, by 2030, the goal is to reduce emissions by 45% compared to 2010. The UK and other major countries start to announce carbon neutrality. Why are we focusing on 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees? On the right side, you can see the difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. There is a large difference. You can see the percentage of the population that is exposed to heat waves, and also the differences in fisheries and the increase in ocean sea levels. So you can see that there are scientific reasons why we need to achieve 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees. So many countries start to declare carbon neutrality. As of April, the number of countries that announced their carbon neutrality is 131 nations. And the total amount of emissions by these 131 countries is about 68% of the global emissions. In orange, you can see the countries that have not announced their carbon neutrality, and together they emit 27% of the carbon. And so you can see that more and more countries are announcing their carbon neutrality, and if they achieve these goals, then, as you can see on the right side, we can limit the increase in global warming by 2 degrees. And if the remaining countries start to declare carbon neutrality, then we can dream of 1.5 degrees. Let's take a look at the major countries that have announced carbon neutrality. You can see that they are the top 10 emitters of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. You can see that China, the US, the EU, Japan are just some of the countries that have announced their carbon neutrality vision. And of the top 10 emitters, Russia and India have yet to declare carbon neutrality. Korea actually is at number 12 in terms of emissions, but we have still announced our carbon neutrality already. Here you can see that there are countries that have announced their carbon neutrality and also the NDCs. The 2030 goals are continuing to be announced, and when the Paris Treaty was signed, the NDC was announced initially, and there are enhanced NDCs that are being announced. Some countries have announced their carbon neutrality, some countries have announced their enhanced NDCs, especially in April of 22nd, the US actually hosted the Global Climate Conference Summit, and many countries actually announced their enhanced NDCs at the event. So on the right side, you can see the countries that have announced their enhanced NDCs. And thanks to these enhanced NDCs, we can look forward to more reduction in emissions and coming closer to our goal of 1.5 degrees. On the road to carbon neutrality, who will lead the changes and who will be held accountable for their declarations? Here you can see on the slide that the red line symbolizes the top 10 emitters, and they actually emit 68% of the total emissions. The top 3, China, the US, and the EU, the top 3 actually emit almost half of the total emissions, 46%. The parts marked in green are the 100 low emitters, and if we add up their emissions, they only take up 3% of the total emissions. And so we need to make sure that the larger emitters make more efforts so that they do not impact the low-emitting countries. What about Korea? Korea actually is right after Canada, and so we're not amongst the top 10, but we are the 11th largest emitters, and we take up 1.51% of the total emissions. And I mentioned that energy transformation is at the core of carbon neutrality. On the chart here is the amount of energy consumed by the total human race and the sources for that energy. From the 1750s, we have had the Industrial Revolution. And so up until the 1800s, there has not been a big change in energy consumption. But we see a large change in the energy consumption from 1850. You can see that the explosion starts in 1850. Here you can see that we have added gas and coal and oil. In the past, we only had traditional biomass, but with Industrial Revolution, we add coal, and on top of that, we add oil, and then on top of that, we add gas. And so you can see that energy sources are added, and you can see that in a short amount of time, there's an explosion in the energy consumption by the world. According to IPCC, by 2030 and 2050, we have set firm goals, and here you can see that we need to make sure that we reduce energy consumption in that short amount of time, especially transform into energy sources that do not emit carbon. Here you can see that 72.3%, according to the 2016 figures, 23.2% of the greenhouse gases comes from energy. But through energy transformation, we can achieve a part of carbon neutrality. This will not be enough. We will also have to work with waste treatment, industrial processes, and agriculture. And so that is why energy transformation is the most important item on this agenda. Energy transformation means that we will shift from a provider-centered system to work on reducing demand and increasing the percentage of renewables in our energy mix. So we need to not only work with changing our energy sources, but we also need to make sure that we have various organizations, R&D programs, administrative systems, as well as enhanced conscious and awareness for this. And so it is indeed a transformation of civilization. In the past, we had a centralized, provider-centered energy system, and we hope that we will be able to transform that into a decentralized, democratic system with the decision-making participation of the local communities. This will not happen overnight. It will not be easy. We do believe that it will be faced with much difficulties and crisis and resistance because we are all very used to the current system, and so it will be very difficult to switch to a new system. And there are many people who are living off this system. The path to carbon neutrality has already opened its doors, and a prime example is that the global market is changing. Global companies are now focusing on a goal to become 100% renewable energy. When I prepared for this presentation, there was 316 companies that have announced RE100, but now there is 319 companies that have become a part of this RE100 movement, which means that 100% of their energy will come from renewables. The RE100 campaign started in 2014. They only had 13 companies, but now you can see that this number has grown to 319 in just a short amount of time. These companies, not only are they planning to use 100% renewables, but they will also be asking their suppliers to become RE100. And that is why it will have a large impact on the global market. It will not only impact the companies that are part of this campaign, but also their suppliers. The companies that are becoming a member of RE100 is increasing in number, and this is their report last year. You can see that these figures are a little bit different from the current numbers because it's based on 2019. Already, there were 50 companies that have achieved RE100, and there were 31% of the companies that actually achieved 50% RE100. Some of their goals are for 2030, sometimes for 2050. On the average, their goals are for 2028, and a bulk of the companies will achieve RE100 according to their plans by 2030. Another change that we can see in the market is something that has already been presented, but it is about the EU introducing the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And so what they are doing is to reflect the cost for the renewables that are used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by using taxes or by using carbon credits. And so this has already been announced by the EU. In June, they have had an announcement on this mechanism, and they will be applying this to concrete, steel, fertilizers, aluminum, and electricity from 2023 to 2026. In the financial sector, they are also participating in the race to zero. The EU actually announced green taxonomy, which has not been completed yet, but it has already been announced. So what they will be doing is selecting the industries that financial companies should invest in because those industries are becoming green. And ESG has become a mega trend for companies around the world. This is the green taxonomy. And here you can see that in order to receive investment, they need to be compliant with one of the 6 major environmental goals. This is to be discussed later, but in the UK, they will be excluding nuclear from these 6 major areas. Denmark, Luxembourg, and Spain are just some of the companies that have asked the EU Council to exclude nuclear from taxonomy. What about Korea? As you can see, we have had a continuous increase in greenhouse gases. So we are the 7th largest emitter of carbon, the 11th largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and compared to advanced countries, you can see that we have an increase in emissions at a very fast pace. In 2009, we set the 2020 reduction goal, and the 2020 reduction goal was to reduce our emissions by 30% compared to the expectations, to reduce that to 54.3 trillion tons. But what is the actual figures? We have seen a steady increase, and we can see that compared to 2008, we actually had a 23% increase in our emissions. But in 2019 and 2020, we had a slight decrease in emissions. But despite this decrease, we believe that because it was triggered by COVID-19, we did have a decrease, but we are still actually emitting much more than what we had expected. Will we be able to continue this downward trend? That is the issue at hand. Here you can see the achievements of climate change related performances by Korea. There is a figure called CCPI, and this is announced by German Watch along with Climate Change Performance Index. And CCPI actually covers 50 countries that emits more than 1% of the global emissions. And so these 50 countries are monitored based on their emissions, their percentage of renewables, climate change policies, and energy consumption. You can see that Korea is ranked at 61. This is because there are no countries in the top 3. So everyone starts with top number 4. And of these 61 rankings, we are 54. This is a little bit better than the 58 that we scored previously, but we are still in the bottom. In terms of energy transformation, the World Economic Forum has evaluated us to be number 49 out of 110 countries, which is about somewhere in the middle. In the case of Korea, we have announced carbon neutrality, and this does not come out of the blue. In 2019, we had a forum related to low carbon emissions, and we invited the academia, the industry, and the civic group to have 100 people joining in and an expert group to conduct the discussions. And then last year in June, we have had the local government announcing the climate change crisis declaration, and in 2020, the 17 metropolitan cities announced carbon neutrality. We announced our Korean New Deal in July, and on October 28th of 2020, President Moon announced the 2050 carbon neutrality goal. And in December, the government actually announced a strategy for this goal, and in December of 2020, we actually submitted LEDs for the UN Climate Change Convention. And this year, on May 29th, we have established the Presidential Committee, which is the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission. Why did we announce carbon neutrality? Well, as a member of the international community, we felt responsible, but at the same time, there was the pressure of the international society. In 2016, we were called the Climate Action Tracker because we did not respond to climate change, and because we have an economic structure that is export-oriented and energy-intensive, we need to respond to the international market. And so in order to secure international competitiveness and also to respond to the carbon border adjustment mechanism and the RE100 campaign, we had to announce our carbon neutrality. We actually have 9 companies that are participating in RE100, including some public sector companies and private sector companies. There was also pressure by civic groups in Korea. At the same time, climate change is not only a risk, but we also believe that energy transformation will become a new growth engine and source for creating jobs. And so we believe that it could be an opportunity to proactively respond to such trends. The 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission is a vehicle to pursue carbon neutrality, and it will become the top governance group for policies and communication. The Carbon Neutrality Commission does not have a legal foundation yet, but we have a presidential decree that creates this commission. Currently, 97 people are participating in this commission in 6 committees, and we also have an expert committee that can be established for the discussion amongst experts, and we will also establish a participatory organization for the people, and we will also have consultative bodies that will include the participation of citizens and the youth. So these are some of the tasks at hand. We are in the process of coming up with a scenario for 2050 carbon neutrality. We are moving from the carbon-based civilization to a decarbonized civilization. And so what we need to do is strengthen our decarbonization momentum by changing the current laws, institutions, policies, and administrative systems. Many people ask, is carbon neutrality possible by 2050? And I ask, we should not ask whether it's possible, we should ask what we can do to make it possible. On the right side, you can see that we have submitted our LEDs to the UN, and here are the contents of our LEDs. How are we going to execute this to make this our reality? That is the task at hand. One of the tasks at hand is to enhance our 2030 NDC. Currently, our goal is to reduce our emissions by 24.4% compared to 2017. But this is not sufficient according to the evaluations of the international community. If the whole country, if the whole world would stand at this goal of about minus 25%, then there will be an increase about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. And so that is why the international community is asking us to enhance our NDC. This actually is a graph that can cause illusions because by 2017 to 2030, that is about 13 years. But from 1990 to 2017, that's almost 30 years. And so we need to make sure that we set higher goals in order to achieve our goal of 1.5 degrees. And so for carbon neutrality, we need to first take a look at the awareness amongst the people. These are the tasks at hand. Of course, there are many tasks at hand, but just to name a few, just like we have heard in previous presentations, the Korean New Deal project is also in line with carbon neutrality, although it was announced before our declaration of carbon neutrality. And so whatever the project that we conduct, we need to make sure that it includes includes carbon neutrality. In order to achieve this, what do we need to solve? What do we need to change? We need to take a look at some issues. We need to also take a look at ways to conduct social dialogue for social consensus. And so, if all of this is to work, we need to have binding legal clauses. And so, we need to make sure that the Basic Act for carbon neutrality is enacted as soon as possible. The 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission will work with possibly 5 to 6 presidents in the future until 2050. And so regardless of the president, I believe that the Commission should play a pivotal role in achieving carbon neutrality. In order to achieve carbon neutrality, we need financing and regulations, and that is why we need the Basic Act on carbon neutrality. And we also need to make sure that we take a look at the industrial changes, the labor changes, and the regional changes that are necessary to achieve this goal. And so concerning this, we need to make sure that no one is left behind, that no one is excluded. We need to make sure that this transformation is a just transformation that is very inclusive. Other than this, we also need to work with renewable energy. We also have NIMBY for renewable energy facilities. So we need to find ways to solve these conflicts through more interest by the public. We also need to take a look at making our finance greener. We also need to take a look at circulatory economy. We also need to take a look at changing our agriculture and our diet possibly as well. So in a nutshell, we need to first take a look at what is carbon neutrality and why we need this. We definitely need a social consensus and an agreement on why we need carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
네, 윤순진 교수님 발제 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Indeed, for carbon neutrality and energy transformation, there is much to do. Thank you very much.
And next, let's go on to the last presentation of session 1. The speaker is from the Gyeongnam Institute. He is the Senior Executive Director of the Future Strategy Center, Mr. Kim Tae-young. He will give a presentation on the title of Mega Regional Cooperation Strategies for Balanced Development in an Era of New Regionalism. Please greet him with a big hand. Yes, as was introduced, my name is Kim Tae-young. And I think that I'm the only one here invited to talk about the regional studies. Thank you very much for your invitation. 11 mega regions are currently preparing for regional cooperation, and I think that I was invited to talk about the current status and how the efforts are proceeding. So first I'll be talking about the mega regional cooperation. The local regions actually are in very dire straits. Already the population in the capital area has exceeded 50% of the total population. And there has been an outflow of 1.6 million of the youth population outside of the capital region. So there is not a lot of youth population in the local regions. The population has been flowing into the capital area. There was a standstill for some time, but once again, we're seeing continuous inflow of population into the capital area. The southeast region is the second largest economic region or economic bloc in Korea, but nevertheless, continuous outflow of population in Busan is taking place. Gyeongnam, for example, has Ulsan, and so there was a strong industrial foundation, but nevertheless, we're seeing continuous outflow of the population. So there was a time when there was a stop to the outflow of population going into the capital area. This was because of the relocation of the administrative capital. But that was temporary. And also polarization in terms of the gross regional domestic production is a big challenge. For example, GRDP of the Southeast region is currently at 14.5% of the total, with 275 trillion won. GRNY is 13.7% of the total. And economic activities are concentrated in the capital area as well. And also in terms of the international flights, you can see that compared to the capital area, Well, 1 out of 7 flights, passenger flights, go into the areas outside of the capital region. And in terms of international freight, it's 1 out of 33. And also, in terms of the universities, only Post-Covet and UNIST are among the top 500 in the global university ranking among Southeast region universities. And also, we are seeing areas that are at risk of extinction increasing. We are seeing a unipolar system centered around the capital area. But is this okay? First of all, there is the challenge of the birth rate. The Seoul birth rate is 0.72. The birth rate for the average, nationwide average, is 0.92. Birth rate for capital region is 0.87. And also, in terms of the national contribution, the capital region actually accounts for 1.043 as of 2018. There is traffic congestion increasing in capital, real estate prices rising in the capital region, dropping in other areas, including Southeast region. And also, the level of satisfaction of life, very low in the capital region, especially when it comes to an environment and also community participation. There is a low level of satisfaction found in those living in the capital area. And Professor Ma had proposed this, but in the past, you can see that there were outflow of population from the rural areas, but now we are seeing an outflow of population in the mid-sized cities as well. And so we need to transform the country to have a multipolar system instead of a unipolar system centered around the capital area. Let's take a look at a number of overseas cases. Megacity in 2018, there were 33, but in 2030, the number increased to 43. And we are seeing mega regional cooperation increasing around the world. A couple of examples. First of all, the UK. There is the Great Manchester Combined Authority, GMCA, in Germany. There is the Stuttgart Regional Union. And also in Japan, there is a grand design of national spatial development towards 2050. In China, there's a network of major metropolitan centers. So let's take a look at the GMCA. Because of industrial challenges, the Greater Manchester area decided to create the combined authority. So these cities and the region's boroughs got together for regional cooperation, and so the strategy was announced. But what we should focus on here is that when you seek for regional cooperation, devolution is very important, and taxation authority was given to the GMCA. So there was greater administrative authority and also the authority to collect taxes secured by the GMCA. There was a plan for promoting mega-regional cooperation, and various entities participated in the process for creating the GMCA. So job creation and accessibility and housing, for example, are the areas that the GMCA is working on. The next example is the case of Germany, the VRS, the Verband Region Stuttgart. You can see that there was joint efforts for spatial development to allow for mega-regional cooperation. And so in 1994, the Verband region Stuttgart was established. The budget is quite high here. It's about 600 billion won that is injected for cooperation, and among the total, 12.4% is government subsidies. There are 11 projects that are being pursued under the VRS. As you can see here, for example, there is transportation and agriculture, forestry, and also next is the Union of Kansai Governments. So this was to overcome the unipolar concentration around the Tokyo capital region, and also to secure more autonomy and responsibility among the local autonomous governments. The Union of Kansai Governments was pursued. So when the Osaka Kansai Expo for 2025 was won by the Kansai region, this Union of Kansai Governments was analyzed to have played a great role for the successful hosting, successful winning of the bid. So you can see here the governance structure for this. But you can see that the union is a bit loose. The budget is about 27 billion, not that much, but not only the government subsidies, but also for the qualifications and licenses, there are a number of businesses that can create profit, and the profit is used as budget for the union. Next, let's look at mega regional cooperation and neo-regionalism. So, from the participatory government, there was a move towards regional cooperation, which went on to the Lee Myung-bak administration. And there was a strengthening of infrastructure at that time. Park Geun-hye administration focused on promoting the happiness at the regional level among communities. And then, starting with the Moon Jae-in administration, there was greater focus on the region's leading decentralized balanced development. But there had to be more motivation or incentives to promote regional cooperation. And also, there was no agreed vision or strategies that could successfully lead such mega regional cooperation. And also, the organizations that were in charge of such regional cooperation did not have sufficient status or authority. And that is why effective governance structure was not built for building such regional cooperation. Right now, this is what is happening. As you can see, there are 4 major mega-regional cooperation being pursued at this moment. There is the Busan-Ulsan-Gyeongnam coalition, there's the Daegu-Gyeongbuk, and then the Daejeon-Sejong-Chungbuk-Chungnam, and then there is the Gwangju and Jeonnam. Let's take a look at the Daegu-Gyeongbuk administrative integration efforts. So the background is quite similar among the 4. There was a committee that was launched to discuss the integration of administration. There were a number of public debates that were held to discuss this issue. And right now, there are efforts ongoing to create a Daegu-Gyeongbuk special city. Next is the Chunchong area mega regional economic bloc project. In November of 2020, there was an agreement reached to discuss and pursue a mega-regional economic bloc in the Chunchong region. And in April of 2021, research and study started to establish a strategy for building this kind of an economic bloc. So, first of all, the main issues will be identified, and then the second stage, there will be an organization established to deal with issues related to the economy and daily lives of the people. And then the third stage, this is a mid to long-term goal, administrative integration will be pursued. And for Gwangju Jeonnam, there was a committee launched for discussing and preparing for the integration of Gwangju Jeonnam, and advisory committee was launched as well. There was an agreement reached, and in April of 2021, a study was launched to look into the mega-regional cooperation projects for this area. And so already the study for the mega-regional cooperation for this area, Gwangju, Jeonnam, has been completed, and there has been a TF established, and also there is a headquarters already established to push towards the integration of Gwangju and Jeonnam. Great cooperative efforts are ongoing. So, Buulgyeong Megacity project. The reason for this is, first of all, as you can see on the left side, the Busan, Ulsan, and the eastern part of Gyeongnam, as you can see, already has a joint living area, spatial area. There's some overlapping in terms of business activities, and also industries are closely working together already. And also there is some homogeneity that can be found in the past in terms of administration. And also there is homogeneity if you look into the history in terms of culture and art. So the Buulgyeong megacity, which is a megacity combining Busan, Ulsan, and the Gyeongnam region, is to create a single economic zone where the people can grow together and also provide a momentum for further economic growth. So in the past, there was some rigidity, but now the collaboration of regional cooperations being pursued under a flexible network. So focused around Busan, Ulsan, and Changwon, Kimhae, for example, there are efforts to have the different cities and areas joined together, and not only here, but also Gyeongnam and also Jiri, commercial area. In other words, the nearby commercial areas will also be connected to the Bulgyeong megacity for economic cooperation. In the past, everything good was found in the capital area, the jobs and the infrastructure, for example. That is why there was concentration in the capital area in terms of the population, the jobs, and infrastructure. But once we have the megacities in place in the regions, we do believe that there will be more job creations found outside of the capital area, and we can have a second major mega city area or center in Korea. So spatial planning would take place under the Bulgyeong megacity plan, and Ulsan and the eastern part of Busan will be connected together to create the Eastern Free Economic Area. And there will be a number of other economic zones or economic areas connecting different parts of Bulgyeong. And we do believe that such connection can help develop the regional economy. And this is not just for within the districts that lie inside Busan, Ulsan, and Gyeongnam, but this kind of development can actually link this region with the surrounding regions as well. So here, the core values for creating this megacity is inclusion, prosperity, sustainability, quality of life, decentralization, and safety. The goal is to create a living community for integration and sharing, and realizing an economic community which can help the further advancement of the nation and the regions, and also creating a culture community and an administrative community. The core strategy is expansion, identity, and connectivity. So currently efforts are ongoing to create the Bulgyeong megacity. This kind of a administrative community will be first launched, and this will tackle transportation-related challenges, safety, environmental issues, industry-related matters, and healthcare-related issues within the megacity. And also an economic community would be pursued. And also there are efforts to have Busan become the host of the next World Expo. So these are some of the detailed plans that are being pursued under the Bulgyeong megacity project. So mega-regional cooperation, in order to overcome some of the limitations and challenges, well, we have to think about how the capital concentration can hurt the nation as a whole. And so starting from the participatory government, there has been a focus placed on balanced national development. And policies to tackle capital concentration and the extinction of local regions must also be reflected further into the policies. So already a number of projects are ongoing, but I think that that is not enough. We need to do more. I do think that there has to be an administrative body newly established to be in charge of pursuing and promoting mega-regional cooperation. And also, infrastructure building and fostering of core industries have to be done through mega-regional cooperation. But for that, there has to be more authorities devolved to the local governments, and also more financial support should be provided to the local regions. For example, the taxation authority, some of it should be given to these megacities. For example, if you look at the GMCA, the Greater Manchester area, you can see that authority was given to GMCA to collect taxes. That is one way to go. And also, there has to be more financing support, and also there has to be a mega regional account newly established so that further financial support can be provided for mega regional cooperation. And last but not least, now there are contributions of the regions, but at the same time we need more local subsidies provided to the regions by the government, and for that we have to revise the Local Subsidy Act so that direct local subsidies can be provided to new special local autonomous entities that would be established for mega regional cooperation. I think that we have a new opportunity ahead of us. We need to have the regions lead the way, take the initiative in promoting mega regional cooperation, because I think that this is one way to further promote balanced national development. Thank you very much.
네, 잘 들었습니다.
Yes, thank you very much. We have just heard from Mr. Kim Tae-young
자, 이렇게 해서
from the
이제
Gyeongnam
1부
Institute,
세션
and
발제가
this
이루어졌고요.
concludes the
지금부터는
presentations for session 1. Let us go into the panel discussion.
발표하셨던 세 분의 발표자와
The panel discussion will invite all three presenters, as well as our moderator, President Jang-Pyo of KDI, as well as Chief Research Fellow Dr. Lee Chang-hoon from the Korea Institute and Professor Ma Gang-lee of Chunchong University on stage. We will be inviting Professor Randall Jones from Columbia University and Director Nathan Hultman from the Center for Global Sustainability of the University of Maryland to join us through the online platform. So we have participants both online and offline for this panel, and we will be talking about the future directions. This first discussion will be moderated by President Jang-Pyo of KDI. Allow me to introduce him to you very briefly. He is currently the president of KDI, and he is also the member of the Presidential Committee on Income-Led Growth. Let us now invite President Hong. Pleased to meet you. As have been introduced, I am President of KDI, moderating Session 1. The first session had 3 presentations, and the core agenda for this session was the Korean New Deal and the future. We have been given time until 3, and so it seems that we have about an hour left for our discussion. We have heard 3 presentations, and we will now be inviting 4 discussants to join us in this conversation. And to each of the discussants, we will be allocating about 10 minutes for your discussions. We have 2 participants joining us from abroad. They are up at very odd hours of the day because of the time difference. And so, to our 2 international participants, we will be giving you priority for the discussions, and we will give you sufficient time for your discussions. Then we will turn to our 2 Korean discussants who are joining us on stage. We have heard about 3 presentations, and why did we have 3 presentations? I think I need to add to why we had 3 presentations. I think it was about this time last year when President Jae-in announced the Korean New Deal, and he talked about the Digital New Deal first, and then there was the Green New Deal following energy transformation, and the last was the Regional Balanced Development New Deal. And so the New Deal has 3 different parts, and that is why we have included 3 presentations for each of the topics. We also need to work on a social safety net for employment. So we will be dealing with these topics during session 1, but there's also another topic related to this topic in other subsequent sessions. So, having said that, we will go to our first discussant. Professor Randall Jones will be the first discussant that we will be inviting. Well, Professor Jones has been in the OECD for a very long time, very knowledgeable about the Asian economy. I believe that he will be presenting his comments on the first presentation by Dr. Koo Jae-in of KDI. We will first turn to Dr. Jones.
I'm very happy to be here to participate in this conference. It's been 18 months since I've been to Korea, and I miss it very much. So I hope in the future there'll be a chance to be in person to meet all my friends and talk about Korea. I want to thank Dr. Koo for a very interesting presentation that was very broad and a lot of perspective. I think first we should congratulate Korea for its strong performance in the wake of the pandemic. Growth was minus 0.9%, but for the 38 OECD countries, it was minus 4.8%. So Korea was a star performer, partly because of the good policies in response to the pandemic, and also the pickup in world trade. And also we should congratulate the Moon administration for developing a long-term plan of investment to help Korea move on past the pandemic. It's very ambitious and very long-term. President Moon says this is a plan for 100 years. So I'm not sure that's realistic because with each new president, we seem to see many changes in policy, but there are many good things in these plans. I'd like to talk about first the social safety net aspect of it that is attached to these plans. And the main points I want to make are first that income inequality and relative poverty are high in Korea compared to other advanced countries. During the 80s and even the 70s, Korea was an example of a very equal, egalitarian process of development, and now it stands out for inequality. Second, the impact of taxes and benefits on income inequality and relative poverty are relatively weak. So that implies that we'll have to have more social spending. The second problem is that public social spending is not targeted enough on those most in need. And third, as you all know, by 2060, Korea will have the oldest population among OECD countries, and public social spending will shoot up as it has in Japan and other countries. So it's very important, crucial, to carefully design the safety net so that it can last over the long term through this aging process. And fourth, we need to address the underlying causes of inequality and poverty. And I'd like to talk a bit about labor market dualism, which is one of the main factors that leads to inequality. So I have a few charts just to back up and try to prove what I have just stated. First of all, in terms of income inequality, Korea, the Gini coefficient is the 8th highest in OECD. The relative poverty rate, which measures the share of the population with an income less than half the national median, there Korea is the 2nd highest. And that's partly due to the fact that the elderly have a very high poverty rate of 43%, and that brings up the average for the entire population. So Korea stands out for inequality compared to other OECD countries. The impact of Korea's tax and benefit system on inequality is rather weak. In the average OECD country, the tax and benefit system reduces the Gini coefficient, the measure of inequality, by 10 percentage points. In Korea, its impact is less than 4%. And then the same picture applies to relative poverty. The impact in the OECD countries is about 8 percentage points. In Korea, it's less than 1. So why is the Korea tax and benefit system not very effective in reducing inequality and poverty? Well, one reason is that most of the public welfare doesn't go to working age people. It goes more to the elderly. So in Korea, the transfers to families as a share of GDP is rather low compared to the OECD average. And the second reason is this targeting issue. In this chart, the bar shows the share of public social spending that goes to the lowest income, the lowest one-fifth of the income distribution. And the diamond shows the share going to the top fifth of the income distribution. So in Korea, both the poorest fifth and the richest fifth both get about 20% of the public social spending. So it'd rather be more to the right, countries like Finland, where 44% of public social spending goes to the lower 20%, and only 8% to the rich 20%. So this relates to the problem of, or the debate over universal welfare. So in Korea, we sometimes hear free school lunches for all students, whether they're from poor or rich households, or free university education for everyone. The latest supplementary package, I think it plans to give payments to 80% of people. So again, this is kind of a universal approach, which means it's not really targeted on the lowest income people. Well, Korea's social spending now is about 11% of GDP. So it's one of the lowest in the OECD, but that's because Korea is one of the youngest countries among the advanced nations. So Korea is the sixth youngest out of the 38 OECD countries. Japan in 1990 also had 11% of GDP going to public social spending. But with population aging, that share has shot up to close to 25% because of increased long-term care, health care, and pensions primarily. So Korea is in the same situation. Korea has a national pension scheme, a long-term care insurance, and universal health insurance. So Korea will also have the same pressure to increase public social spending. The Chosei Youngguan, which is linked to the Economy and Finance Ministry, did an estimate a few years ago that said by 2060, when Korea is the oldest OECD country, that public social spending will be 26% of GDP. So Korea will rise to close to Denmark and some of the Scandinavian social welfare states. So the question is, will Korean voters be willing to pay for that? Because we've had the national pension scheme, and over time, the generosity has been ratcheted down because the contribution rate is rather low. So Korea has to face this question of aging and rising social spending. We look at one of the drivers of inequality, non-regular workers. To me, that's really a key issue. 1/3 of employees, take 38% actually, are non-regular, meaning part-time, fixed term, or dispatched workers. So their wage, the black line is the overall non-regular, it's about 1/3 less than the regular workers. So this creates large wage inequality and income inequality and poverty. The second issue that I want to talk about is educational opportunity. And that goes back again to Hagwon, which are give advantages to families with more resources. And let me turn now to the second part of the New Deal, which is on the digital New Deal and the Green New Deal. The main points I'd like to make here are Korea is really a polarized or a dualistic economy. And that reflects the past growth strategies that focused on manufactured exports and large companies. And so during the heavy and chemical industry drive, money was channeled into certain companies, in certain industries to try to accelerate development. That's left Korea with this polarized economy where the productivity wages in the service sector are far below those in manufacturing, and productivity wages in SMEs, in 중소기업, are far below the large firms. The OECD Inclusive Study, which came out at the end of last year, stated past Korean winter picking and specialization policies may have weakened and protected incumbents, contributing to productivity gaps across firms and sectors. In other words, the SMEs and the service sector have trouble keeping up, partly because of the focus on the manufacturing. So the key to the digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, in my view, is making them effective in addressing these obstacles that have kept part of the economy backward. And so if we want to have inclusive growth, we have to find a way of overcoming that. So again, here are just a few charts to try to support what I've just said. This chart shows the dispersion of labor productivity and labor income between firms. So on the vertical axis, we can see the average labor income in a firm with the 90th percentile compared to one of the 50th percentile. So in Korea, the ratio of labor income for the 90th percentile firm is 2.1 times that of one in the middle. So that's the largest wage gap of any OECD country. If you look at productivity on the horizontal axis, we can see that the difference in labor productivity between a 90th percentile firm and a 50th percentile firm is the second highest in OECD. So this goes back to this polarized economy that we need to try to address to reduce inequality and promote growth. We look at productivity of services. 100 is labor productivity in manufacturing. So for the OECD average, service sector productivity is about 82% of manufacturing sector productivity. And the countries on the right, about 10 of them, actually have higher productivity of services than they do in manufacturing. For Korean economy, it's only 42%. Service sector productivity is less than half of the manufacturing productivity. We look by size, large companies, 250 workers or more. The average productivity of small firms is 62% of the large firms. In Korea, it's less than 1/3. So again, there's this large gap that creates inequality and is a hindrance to growth. So we have to overcome these problems. One is that SMEs have low levels of R&D spending. They account for only 20% of business R&D. Obviously, the average is 30%. They face labor shortages because they have trouble hiring workers. Young people want to work in large companies or the government, so they have trouble getting the human capital they need to introduce new technology. And they also lack the financial strength to invest in new technology. And I think the competitive pressures that should force out non-productive or non-viable SMEs are not strong enough to be effective. So in President Moon's vision of an innovative, inclusive economy for all, a country for all, I think we need to look at this first focus listed on the Digital New Deal. It states that stronger integration of DNA throughout the economy, promoting the integration of data, the 5G network, and artificial intelligence through all sectors will create new digital products and services while also enhancing the productivity of the Korean economy. So I think when I look at the New Deal, you see some of these projects seem to be focused on large companies. Hydrogen cars, which is one of the 10 headline projects, there we have Hyundai and Doosan, another major conglomerate, are taking the lead. Electric cars is another area. Again, that's Hyundai, Kia, Sangyeon, and GM Korea. So it's hard to see, if we target these industries, it's hard to see the role for the SMEs to become a driver of growth, as President Moon has said. So let me stop there, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you later. Thank you very much.
여기까지 제 분석을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much. So we have just heard from Dr. Randall Jones, and he talked about some of his analysis. He has worked for OECD for a long time, and he mentioned about the inclusive growth framework of the OECD, and he has a lot of data related to Korea coming from that. And so he commented on Korea's New Deal and what are the points that should be further focused on. Thank you very much, and let us now go on to our next discussant.
The second discussant that we will be inviting is Director Nathan Hultman of the Center for Global Sustainability at the University of Maryland. And I believe that he will be commenting on the presentation by Professor Sun-Jin Yoon, the second presenter. Your comments, please.
So thank you for that introduction and for inviting me to participate in this conference today. I want to thank Professor Sun-Jin Yoon for inviting me to comment on her very insightful and excellent presentation, and to the organizers for assembling an excellent program on a set of critical topics, not only for Korea, but also for Korea's international leadership. We are facing a critical period this year as a global community as we face the climate crisis. By now, we all know the urgency of the issue and the scale of the climate challenge. Korea is now navigating a difficult challenge of reaching a high-ambition climate pathway that also supports a vibrant economy and provides broadly shared benefits. Fortunately, there are reasons to be hopeful. Changes in our global politics, expanded public support, and actions from across all of society, and the dramatic decreases in costs for clean technologies have given our leaders a real opportunity to take action to set the world on a path toward successfully addressing this climate crisis. In light of this rare moment for action, Professor Yoon's paper makes many excellent points. Because of my limited time, I would like to focus on three to highlight in my comments. The first point is the very important progress we have seen from the international community in recent months to ratchet up ambition to keep warming under 1.5 degrees, and Korea's important leadership role. As Professor Yoon notes, climate science finds that global carbon neutrality by roughly mid-century is crucial to achieve a 1.5 degree goal. Korea, along with dozens of countries around the world, has now pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Korea's leadership as an advanced economy is also encouraging developing nations to put forward carbon neutrality pledges, and I applaud this effort. The second point made in Professor Yoon's paper is the importance of action across diverse parts of society. Professor Yoon points out how not only national governments, but also the private sector globally have increasingly been taking on new commitments like 100% renewable energy, 2050 net zero, and more. In fact, work that our research team at the University of Maryland has been doing in the United States over the past few years has demonstrated the central importance of these all-of-society approaches on climate action that can be robustly built by ambitious national policies rooted in support and commitment from subnational actors and the private sector. While the exact policies of such all-of-society approaches will vary by country, diverse actors in all countries will need to evaluate what they can do, working with their governments to achieve the high levels of ambition needed to reach net zero pathways. A third critical point made by Professor Yoon is the importance about thinking about the coming rapid economic transition as one of opportunity. And that means not only opportunity for some, but opportunity for all. As all of our countries continue to move quickly toward a low-carbon 2030 and 2050, we must also look to ensure that the benefits are broadly shared and that the economically vulnerable are not left behind. As Korea seeks to navigate this pathway, several next steps stand out as critical in my view. First is for Korea to establish a comprehensive national climate strategy that will guide action for the next decade. And as part of that, President Moon recently committed at President Biden's Climate Leaders Summit to a new and enhanced NDC or 2030 climate target. Korean leadership to join the US, Europe, UK, Canada, Japan, and other countries who have put forward NDCs of high ambition in line with the science. While national circumstances vary, 2030 targets like those offered by Canada at 40 to 45% reductions, Japan at 46 to 50% reductions, and the United States at 50 to 52% reductions present reasonably good comparisons for the Korean situation. A significantly strengthened NDC will be critical for Korea to achieve a pathway to its goal for carbon neutrality. For all of our countries, long-term pledges must be matched with actions on the ground. Korea has already taken a big step in this direction with the moratorium on new coal builds and a commitment on halting coal finance. As Korea develops its climate strategy, similar levels of action can be part of concrete policies to reduce emissions across all sectors and all greenhouse gases. I recognize that my own country of the United States also has work to do to achieve our high ambition 2030 and 2050 numbers. And I believe we do have several pathways that can allow us to get there. In the Korean context, many such opportunities seem to be quite potentially valuable, and many experts there have already been discussing strengths and weaknesses of different approaches. Collaborative research that our center has been involved in has highlighted a few of these types of possibilities. For example, since Korea has been very successful at a no new coal policy, this could be enhanced by halting lifetime extensions for existing coal and accelerating their retirement. In transportation, Korea is well positioned to be a globally leading nation in both electric vehicles and in hydrogen vehicles. So it could consider policies to accelerate deployment of those technologies. In buildings and industry, accelerated electrification and efficiency measures would be helpful to transition rapidly enough. Given both the immense challenge of reaching the 2050 neutrality goal and the real and near-term opportunity for Korea to set itself on a pathway that will realize new growth toward that climate-friendly future, the new Carbon Neutrality Committee has a very important job. Addressing climate change in every country will require an all-of-society effort that also draws from the nation's best analytical thinking and policy ideas. I give my best wishes and full support to Professor Sun and the entire 2050 Carbon Neutrality Committee as they undertake this important work, which will be important not only for Korea's future, but also for our global ability to address the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your comments. Well, he has mentioned several points, and these points were very important. And so concerning this, we will surely turn back to the woman in charge of all of these actions, back to Professor Yoon later on for her additional comments. So we have heard from two discussants who have joined us through the online platform. We will now go to the discussants who have joined us on stage.
And so first of all, I would like to hand over the microphone to the Chief Research Fellow of the Korea Environment Institute, Dr. Lee Chang.
Yes, I believe that he will be commenting on carbon neutrality as well. As have been introduced, I am Lee Chang-un, a Chief Research Fellow at the Korea Environment Institute. Thank you very much for this invitation. I will also be commenting on Professor Yoon's presentation, just like Director Holtmann. Next week, we will be celebrating the first anniversary of the Comprehensive Plan for the Korean New Deal. And if we take a look at the plans, carbon neutrality is included in the comprehensive plan. In the process of preparing for the comprehensive plan, we have included the goal of carbon neutrality, but there was controversy over whether we should include the year 2050 or not. At that time, we thought it was too early to include the exact year of 2050, and so that year was not included in the comprehensive plan. But in just 5 to 6 months, President Moon announced the 2050 carbon neutrality goal. And then, if we go back a year from that, at the end of 2019 or early 2020, at that time, when we set the long-term low-carbon plan, we actually wanted to reduce our emissions by 75% compared to BAU. Not net zero, but 75% reduction. But that 75% goal was resisted by the industry. They said, you don't know the reality because we are actually a manufacturing-centered economy and we have energy-intensive industries, and so 75% reduction is impossible, everyone said. But all of a sudden, we have the industry on board, we have the Ministry of Industry, Energy and Infrastructure on board, and we all realize that this is the only path that is available for us. And so that is why we are all on board with carbon neutrality. This is great news and very encouraging. Just like Professor Yoon has mentioned, carbon neutrality is being pursued by the countries that are emitting close to 70% of the emissions. And just like Professor Holtman has mentioned, the international society, we are not talking about the 2050 carbon neutrality, but rather the 2030 NDC, which was mentioned by Director Hultman. The NDCs is in the limelight currently. Many people have enhanced NDCs for 2030, and just like Professor Holtman has mentioned, in the US, compared to the 2005, they have announced that 50 to 52% reduction will be made, and in Japan, they have enhanced their NDC to 46%. And so, President Moon has also announced that we will announce an enhanced NDC by October, and the Carbon Neutrality Commission has also mentioned that by September, we will have a more concrete idea on the enhanced NDC. So how much of an increase do we need? Well, we will have to take a look at two standards. First, we need to achieve 1.5 degrees, so it has to be aligned with that goal. And second, we will need to take into consideration the Korean situation. So the 1.5 degrees set by the international community, well, the most rational way to achieve this is to scientifically calculate the amount of carbon that we can emit, and that will be the carbon budget. And then the carbon budget should be allocated to different countries. And so when we are allocated with the carbon budget, then that should be the total amount of carbon that we emit in Korea. And we will then need to have that budget and break that down into different years, and then we will have to take a look at our carbon budget for up to 2030. But the issue is the global carbon budget, there is no absolute standard to allocate that to different countries. According to UN treaties, we are talking about an equitable distribution, but the definition of that equitable distribution is different from country to country. And so one alternative that we can take a look at is to benchmark the enhanced NDCs of other countries. And I think we can take a look at a few perspectives. First, we have to take a look at the actual figures. So in 2018, we have the actual figures for emissions. And so the countries that have enhanced their NDC, how much of an enhancement has there been in their enhanced NDC? Well, 2017 is our base year, and currently we are looking at a goal of 24.4% reduction by 2030 compared to 2017. So that is the current NDC for Korea. And if we take a look at past NDCs of other countries, it's usually in the early 20% range. And so if we start to reduce our emissions by 2017, then it's aligned with the original NDCs. But if we take a look at the enhanced NDCs, we need to be somewhere in the early 40% range. And so compared to what we have emitted thus far, we need to set our enhanced NDCs to be in the early 40% range. And we also need to take a look at the determination of each country. So everyone has a base year, and in Japan, the base year is 2013. They have increased their NDCs to 46%. And so they started with 26%, and they added another 20 percentage point to become 46%. And so that's actually an 80 to 90% increase in their NDC. And so when we apply that percentage to Korea, then that will mean that we should be somewhere in the late 30% range. And if we take a look at our goal of carbon neutrality of 2050, we have to take a look at the different base years. For the US, it's 2005. For the EU, it's 1990. So we start from the base year, and then we draw a direct straight line to 2050, and we need to take a look at what percentage that brings us to at 2030, and that's about 39% for Korea. So if we take a look at other cases, it seems that we should set our enhanced NDC somewhere in the 40% range, and somewhere around 40% means that because our current goal is at 520 million tons by 2050, we need an additional reduction of about 100 million tons. And so the Carbon Neutrality Commission now needs to take a look at where that 1 million ton will come from. I think the most realistic alternative will be to work with the low-hanging fruits first. We always talk about moving away from coal. In 2030, coal generation will be about 29.9% of the total energy mix. And if we can actually reduce that to 20% or 10%, we can look forward to dozens of millions of reductions in emissions. And so we will probably start with moving away from coal. The rest should come from buildings, transportation, and industries. And I believe that it will be a very hot topic for discussion within Korea where the additional emission reduction should come from. And so we need to have a society-wide dialogue to achieve these goals. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. Thank you for summarizing all of the issues at hand related to this issue. Well, it seems that the enhanced NDCs are somewhere in the 40% range. Our figures are way below that currently, but some people say that the goals that we set forth in the current NDC, will we be able to actually achieve that? And so we need to think about the task at hand.
Yes, now it's time for our last panel discussant for this session, Professor Ma Gang-rae of Chunchong University. And I understand that he will be commenting on the presentation by Mr. Kim Tae-young. Please go ahead. Yes, thank you very much. Now, it is indeed an honor for me to be invited at this important event which discusses important national agendas. So today, we have heard about the goals and the efforts for carbon neutrality, but I am here to comment on the presentation by Mr. Kim Tae-young. And in fact, the balanced national growth as part of the Korean New Deal is what I am here to talk about. So carbon neutrality and balanced national development, I think, are two agendas that are very important for developing a sustainable country and society. Dr. Kim Tae-young, he talked about the need for building megacities, the direction towards building megacities, and he talked in a very detailed manner. So I think I have only a couple of points to add. If you look at the plans to connect the different local governments and move for administrative integration, you can find that it's quite different from the past discussions. In the past, when we talked about administrative integration and connecting the different local areas, the reason for such integration was because we had to connect the infrastructure in the regions for effective utilization of the infrastructure. But now we are talking about the integration of the local regions because there is severe unipolarization centered around the capital region. If we do not move out of this unipolar system, we have this concern that our society, our nation will not be sustainable. And so there is this bottom-up approach to deal with this challenge, this crisis, and thus pursue integration. So then, why is this a problem, that there is unipolarization centered around the capital area? First of all, there's a housing issue. The housing prices are too high in the capital area, especially Seoul. And also, the very low birth rate of Seoul. It has dropped to around 0.6%. This is indeed a serious problem regarding density and also the future generations. And also, outside of the capital area, the regions are suffering from outflow of population. This makes it very difficult to efficiently utilize existing infrastructure. And also, there are people still living in the regions, in the local regions, but this leads a considerable hike in terms of regeneration costs. So, those living in the capital region and outside of the capital region will suffer. And this will ultimately lead to an unsustainable nation. So, at the core of these challenges are the changes in the industrial structure and changes in terms of job creation. To make this more easy to understand, let me explain. Before the 1960s, we lived in an agricultural society, so it didn't matter where people lived. People could be scattered across the country. But then with industrialization, we saw a number of cities being developed, and the industries were focused in these certain areas. But amidst industrialization, we could see that the regional GDP, or the gross national production, actually was still kept a balance in terms of the level at the capital area and outside of the capital area. But then from a certain period, there was this significant imbalance that we could find. And also in terms of transportation, we could see that there were heavy congestion in certain areas and concentration. So this is not found not only in Korea but outside of Korea as well. For example, in Korea, within Seoul, and also within Seoul, Gyeongnam, that's the area of concentration. And we could see that if we look at the metropolitan cities, the industries were weakening, the populations were flowing out. They were going to Seoul, and at the same time, the infrastructure's efficient use were weakened. So, against this backdrop, the non-capital area cities have acknowledged that they would not be able to survive if this situation continues. And so they looked into some of the potential projects that can be developed with the nearby regions, and they looked at how they can secure the youth population and create a settlement environment that could attract the young people. These regions looked into ways to develop industries to create jobs to attract more people, the population. So I think that this is a very important issue, and in pursuing these megacity creations, I think that the activities of the central government has to be minimized, but nevertheless there is a role to be played by the central government. So I talked about the changes in the industrial structure and about the need for job creation at the local level. The role of the central government is to ensure balanced national growth. There has to be heightened awareness for the need for balanced national development. And the central government has to work with the local governments to draw a big picture for such national balanced development. And what is most important is to provide incentives to businesses, to the anchor companies. So all of the ongoing discussions, well, there are incentives being discussed, but there has to be more dramatic incentives being provided, suggested, and this should be backed up by the central government. So there is ongoing talk about the megacities, especially in the southern and eastern part of Korea, and there's a lot of interest in these ongoing projects. There are people representing KDI here today, and I would like to mention that there is a limitation to building the infrastructure in these megacities, because there is the challenge of preliminary feasibility studies. The feasibility studies, they are based on past demands, past demand trends. And if you look at the regions outside of the capital area, which are declining, it is really difficult for these areas to secure economics and pass the preliminary feasibility studies for any project or any business. And so, rather than applying the logic that infrastructure is needed because there exists demand for such infrastructure, we should think about how much infrastructure can generate demand. That should be the focus when pursuing the mega regional cooperation and integration. In the areas outside of the capital area, I believe that there is potential. But if you look at the recent urban development plans, well, working, enjoying leisure, and the settlement environment, all of these have to be taken into consideration to provide the right living environment and platform. So the right settlement environment has to be provided to attract people to live and work in areas outside of the capital region. And also, in the capital region, you can see that the industrial ecosystem is well built. But to build that kind of industrial ecosystem, a lot of energy is required. So in order to create an ecosystem for innovative industries, a lot of efforts and resources are needed. The job creation system requires a governance that involves the central government, the local government, universities, local autonomous entities, and private corporations. So these entities have to work together. Professor Tae-young mentioned a couple of things that I would like to comment about. I think that these points should be sincerely considered by the government. The balanced national development policy should include the policies for enhancing and promoting the birth rate and other social issues. But I think that more specifically, we have to think about and benchmark competitive city-states such as Singapore and Hong Kong. I think that if we have cities of that scale that matches the scale of Singapore or Hong Kong, then if we have a number of these city centers or mega cities in Korea, then Korea can further advance. Thank you very much. We just concluded the comments of all of the panel discussants, and now it is time for the speakers to respond. So in relation to the comments, well, we have 10 minutes remaining, and Perhaps before we listen to the speakers respond, maybe we can receive one question.
So we will only be able to accept one question or comment from the floor because of the time constraint. I believe that there are none actually. Well, I did receive some questions prior to the session. In preparing for Inclusive Korea 2021, we had the process of collecting opinions from the people of Korea for about a week. Concerning the first session, what are the thoughts of the people of Korea? And we have some questions for the speakers, and so we have actually provided those questions. And there's one question to Dr. Koo.
And one of the concerns of the people is the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Digital Revolution. And would this lead to challenges in terms of job creation? In other words, there can be platform labor-related issues or instability or loss of job security. So I think that is one of the concerns in the people's minds. So there was a question related to this. And also, education is very important, especially to prepare for the future. Not only the students, but also teachers should prepare themselves and equip themselves with relevant knowledge. I think that a teacher raised this question. So if you can comment on that as well, that would be very helpful.
Related to carbon neutrality, we have had many questions from the public. The Green New Deal, carbon neutrality. We need to walk down this path for the environment, but after carbon neutrality, what will happen to our industries and our people? And I don't think there are any directions for the post-carbon neutrality era. And many people are quite concerned. And this is similar to what has already been presented. If we have a change of government, what will happen to carbon neutrality? And so I think this person is quite knowledgeable. I can see that the people of Korea are quite knowledgeable about this issue. And so this person is asking questions about the legal foundation for the commission. Well, the third topic seems to be quite difficult because we don't have any direct questions to the third speaker. But we have had many questions from Professor Ma concerning the third topic, so we will go back to our speakers, starting with Dr. Koo.
Yes, Dr. Randall Jones made a number of comments, and he has studied the Korean economy. I think that he has raised issues almost as much as giving a presentation, but to summarize, he talked about the dualism of the labor market, and also he talked about the inequality and poverty, and also the gap, the large corporations and the SMEs. And also he talked about the Korean New Deal and how there is some focus more placed on the large corporations. And he said that fundamentally the Korean New Deal should try to tackle these challenges in Korea. So the Digital New Deal should be reflected in the policies to help overcome the challenges. That was one of the recommendations that he made. And also he mentioned that digitalization and the Fourth Industrial Revolution could lead... Well, there was a question raised by an audience member about how the Fourth Industrial Revolution and digitalization can influence the job market. Now, I was able to see how data is being widely used in the businesses. I think that if this data is widely utilized by the SMEs, then they can be more supported in terms of their digital transformation, and their gap with the large businesses, I think, can be decreased. Now, digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution, what kind of impact will this have on the job market? I think that there's concern about this not only here in Korea, but everywhere, including the US. And I think that rather than standing still, however, we have to think about the skills that is required throughout the life cycle for each age bracket and think about upskilling and reskilling. The government, I understand, is aware of this and is recording the skills that are required for the different stages of the life cycle and preparing for such upskilling and reskilling. And if this is further developed, then I think that the difficult work, the hard work, can be given to machines and be automated, but we can have the people engage in more quality jobs.
Well, it seems that in the US, it's about 2 in the morning. And thank you very much for joining us at this very inconvenient time. Thank you to the two professors for joining us at this conference. And a special thank you to Professor Hultman for commenting on my presentation. During the Obama administration, he worked on energy policies and climate policies, and he has actually played a role in increasing the NDC by the US, and so he is a very active scholar in this field. Thank you very much for joining us at this conference. And personally, we have had close ties in the past, but it's been about 10 years since I have seen him, and so it's great to see him again. Hello. Well, Professor Holtmann has commented, and it was not questions about my presentation, but rather, I think he did a great job in summarizing the points that I wish to make through my presentation. In Korea, is it the UNCNTD? They have actually changed our status from developing country to advanced country. I think this is the first time that this has happened to any country in the world. And so our carbon neutrality efforts is important as an advanced country, but also as an example for developing countries. We held the P4G Seoul Summit recently, and I believe that that is an example of our leadership in the global stage for climate change. I hope that we will not stop at declaring our goals and ambitions, but I look forward to such declarations being followed by action so that we can make great contributions to reducing carbon emissions around the world, and I believe that that will be a quite meaningful contribution. Just like Professor Hultman has mentioned, carbon neutrality cannot happen through any one single actor in our society. We need to make sure that all of society works together. And when I make presentations like I did today, many people ask, if we only emit 1.5% of the global emissions, just because we become carbon neutral, what big difference would it make on the global scale? Some people actually ask those questions, and I'm sure that there are people in the public who want to also ask these questions. But as I have shown in my slide, we are the 11th largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and there are 180 countries behind us. If we don't do our part, the rest of the countries will feel like they don't need to do their part, which means that collectively we will not be able to achieve the goal of 1.5 degrees. But if we work hard, the countries behind us, they will also work to cooperate to achieve the 1.5 degrees goal. And when we move together, then we will be able to work with the vulnerable groups so that they do not suffer from our lack of action. And so we need to make sure that our lack of action does not contribute to more suffering for the vulnerable groups. And not just on an ethical perspective, changes in this front will be a new opportunity for us. If we could actually maintain our standard of living without damaging the environment, that will be a great transformation and a great opportunity for all of us. And so therefore, we need to become more proactive in responding to these challenges, not only for us, but also for humankind and all other organisms that are living with us on Earth. And so, just like Professor Hultman has mentioned, Korea needs to become more proactive, especially for coal generation. We have made a decision to stop new investment overseas and in Korea related to new facilities, and I believe that such a declaration by Korea will have a positive impact on other countries around the world. And such efforts by the government and changes in the market will definitely reduce the possibility of maintaining everything as status quo, which will definitely lead to devastation. The issue at hand is enhancing our NDC. Well, Dr. Lee has talked about various standards that we need to follow in enhancing our NDC, and he mentioned that there are different calculations that can happen. Well, an enhanced NDC cannot be calculated by a single person. We need to take a look at the opinions of all stakeholders within our society to bring together our opinions. To the best of my knowledge, the Parliamentary Committee on Environment and Science and Society, they have actually discussed on whether they will be including certain variables for 2030. So important decisions are being made at this point in time. The law on carbon neutrality should include a goal, which is being discussed currently, whether the actual goal will be included in the law. But in order to include a goal, we need to have a definite goal. And so we believe that we will have an enhanced NDC plan for October and possibly announce our enhanced NDC in Glasgow. But if we are to include that content into our law, then maybe we should delay the enactment of the law until after Glasgow. So there are many issues that are up in the air. And so what we need to take a look at now is to take a look at the standards that we will use to decide our enhanced NDC. I think the issue of accountability should be given a priority. As I mentioned before, as a member of the international community, we need to take responsibility for the damage that we have done throughout history and the damage that we are conducting now. So we need to be held accountable for that. And we also need to be held accountable for the future generations. We need to make sure that the future generations' right to life is not violated by our decisions that we make right now. And so those should be some of the standards. Another responsibility that we have is to have the responsibility of the emitters themselves to take responsibility for the emissions that they have done thus far. And all of these discussions should not be abstract and ambiguous, but rather we need to base our discussions on scientific facts and calculations. And so we need to also emphasize innovation. Science and technology is very innovative in itself. Science and technology continues to develop very quickly. So how much credit are we going to give to science and technology for its potential? And what kind of innovation are we going to allocate for the development of industries and job creation? So we should not just take a look at job creation of the past, but we need to take a look at new opportunities in the future. Well, I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time. Yesterday, I've met the ambassador from Denmark, and he mentioned that Korea is very advanced, especially in wind power. We have great technology. When we talk about wind power, we always talk about the blades, but the undersea structure and the tower itself, we have the world's top technology, and we have the world's top technology for the cables that go under the sea. And so we have great potential for wind power. That's what the ambassador from Denmark has mentioned in our conversation. So we need to take this into account, and we need to make sure that we utilize the potential that we have to move forward in a more proactive way. Thank you very much.
So you still have time until tomorrow, so you cannot have everything on your mind spoken today. Leave something to mention tomorrow. So, Dr. Kim Tae-young, it's your turn. Please go ahead. Yes, well, the 부울경 is top-notch when it comes to the wind power. Professor Ma, he did not raise questions, but rather he shared some comments for further improvements for the megacity projects, and I will reflect them into the plans. When we are pursuing such projects, there are a number of questions that I receive. For example, what's good about the capital region? That's one of the questions that I receive. So,
뭔가 요구해서 얻으려고 하는 이 차원이 아니고 국가 전체가 다 좋은 그런 논리가 필요하지 않나라는
they're asking what is the benefit that the capital region will enjoy when we pursue the megacity project. But we have to look at the projects from a national perspective. So the benefits will contribute to advancing the nation as a whole. And I think that these megacities, they have to be led, these projects have to be led by the local autonomous governments. And one of the reasons that blocked such projects in the past was because we did not have the authority. But there was a revision of the laws. And I think that once we have a special local entity in place, then we will have a new growth engine that will allow us to push forward with these megacity projects. Already, the people believe that they are living in the same zone. So I think that the sentiment is ripe. We are prepared to push forward with the megacity projects in terms of the legal basis and also the sentiment of the people. But this is indeed a national project. It's a project. These projects are for balanced national development. So having said that, we need the financial support from the central government. We need support from the central government, especially financing. And depending on the financial support, I think that these projects will be accelerated or not. So that the financial aspect is very important. Thank you very much. So we have just heard from the three speakers and our panel discussants, and it's time to wrap up. So a lot of points were made. In particular, I would like to thank the people here and the audience for staying until the end of the session. The Korean New Deal marks its first anniversary, and what it has accomplished up till now, the direction for the future was what was discussed and reviewed in this session. I took a look at the budget, and as of July of last year, the budget for the Korean New Deal was set aside and included in the budget. And starting from this year, it was included in the regular budget. The scale is about 22 trillion won. And so you can say that 2021 is actually the base year for the start of the Korean New Deal. Why do we have to benchmark the New Deal of the 20th century? There was a lot of controversy about that. Dr. Randall Jones and Dr. Holtmann actually gave a lot of help in terms of determining the New Deal for Korea. And also with the launch of the Biden administration, the Korean New Deal 제2의 뉴딜에 관련된 대책들이 지금 추진이 되고 있습니다. 그 내용 그 자체는 뭐 여러분이 잘 아시고 계시지만 아메리칸 레스큐 플랜, reinforced
잡 플랜
American rescue frame, American job frame, American family frame, for example. These actually have been in place and being pursued at a larger scale compared to what was discussed today. Anyhow, until late in the night, we are joined by our two foreign panel discussants, Dr. Jones and Dr. Holtmann. Thank you very much for your contribution. And with this conference, I do hope that Korea's experience and the US experience and the EU experience can be shared. I hope that we can have venues like this to share our experiences. Once again, I would like to thank everyone, especially Dr. Randall Jones and Dr. Nathan Hultman. Why don't we give them a big round of applause? Thank you.
네, 고맙습니다. 다시 한번 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much. Another big round of applause, please.
네, 이렇게 해서
This brings us to the end of session 1. We will take a short break, and please join us at 3:20 for session 2. Throughout the break, we will also have an event to certify that you have participated online, so we look forward to your participation.